Ringo's anger didn't begin at Abbey Road. It began in a hospital bed. As a child in wartime Liverpool, Richard Starkey spent more time sick than in school. First peritonitis, then tuberculosis. He lost years of education, fell behind other children, and emerged quiet, shy, and carrying a permanent sense that everyone else knew more than he did. That insecurity followed him. Even in the biggest band in the world, he would always feel like the one with the shortest resume. The drums became his escape. In local bands like Rory Storm and the Hurricanes, he wasn't flashy, but he was rock solid. That reliability is why, in 1962, when the Beatles needed a stronger drummer than Pete Best, they called him. He walked into EMI as the upgrade, and within days was humiliated. During the Love Me Do session, producer George Martin brought in session drummer Andy White because he wasn't convinced the new guy was good enough. Decades later, Ringo admitted the sting never faded. He said he went through hell personally because of it, and even made Martin apologize for years. Imagine joining as the supposed savior and immediately being replaced on your first single. The press didn't help. Headlines joked he could only keep time. Critics called him the least talented Beatle, insisting he was lucky to stand behind Lennon and McCartney. Your first big hit, and the story is that you're only there because of your friends. Inside the band, the hierarchy was clear. John and Paul wrote the songs. George was the frustrated third genius trying to break through. And Ringo sang the novelty numbers, played steady beats, and made people laugh, nothing more. When manager Brian Epstein died in 1967, the stabilizing force disappeared, and that quiet, good-natured drummer suddenly found himself caught between three powerful egos. One of them, more than anyone else, made him feel small. If there was one Beatle who consistently tested Ringo's patience, it was Paul McCartney. After Epstein's death, Paul stepped into the leadership vacuum. He wrote relentlessly, organized sessions, and pushed everyone back into the studio when they drifted. Ringo later summed it up simply: Paul always made the call. Paul wanted them to work all the time because he was the workaholic. It sounds admirable, but inside the band it often felt like control. Paul wasn't just writing songs, he was telling people how to play them. The breaking point came during the White Album sessions in 1968. Paul, obsessing over tiny details, kept making Ringo redo a simple drum pattern again and again. Finally, McCartney sat at the kit himself to demonstrate how it should be played. For a drummer who had already been replaced once before, that wasn't just correction. It felt like confirmation. You're optional. Ringo walked out. He left the band for about 2 weeks while they struggled on without him. Years later, he still spoke about the pain of being treated like equipment instead of a partner. Paul's perfectionism kept standards sky high, but it also made the others feel like session musicians on their own records. For Ringo, already branded the least talented, watching Paul take his seat was like seeing his worst fear unfold in real time. And yet, history twisted in unexpected ways. These two men eventually became each other's last living link to the band. In 2015, Paul inducted Ringo into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame as a solo artist. In recent years, they've toured together and shared the stage, with McCartney calling their bond very special. Time softened what once felt like rivalry. But nothing unsettled Ringo more than watching John Lennon slowly drift into someone he barely recognized. For years, John had been the band's anchor. Even when arguments flared, Ringo stood behind him like a steady shadow. Then, in 1968, something shifted. Yoko Ono didn't just appear beside John. She appeared in the studio, in the creative process, in conversations, and eventually in the unspoken hierarchy of the group. The Beatles had always operated as a closed circle, for voices, for opinions. Suddenly, there were 5 presences in the room, and only one seemed to matter most. The atmosphere grew stranger with every session. During experimental recordings, Yoko would offer suggestions about tone or rhythm. What stunned Ringo wasn't her boldness, it was John's reaction. Instead of defending his bandmates, John sided with her instantly. At one point, he looked at Ringo and said bluntly, "Just keep it even." That's enough. For a drummer already carrying the stigma of being the least talented, that cut deep. Your opinion ends where hers begins. Tensions escalated whenever anyone questioned her presence. George Harrison once snapped in frustration. John exploded in response, slamming a table and accusing the others of disrespect. It stopped being about music and became about loyalty, and John's loyalty had shifted. For Ringo, who valued peace, the emotional toll was enormous. In his eyes, the band was losing its leader to an all-consuming relationship that left no oxygen for anyone else. Later, Ringo admitted the group was already drifting apart, but the shift felt undeniable. In 1980, he visited John in New York. They laughed, relaxed, and for a moment it felt like they were still brothers. Weeks later, John was assassinated. Whatever tensions lingered vanished before they could ever be resolved. Then there was Alan Klein, the outsider who turned internal cracks into fractures. When Klein arrived, it felt like relief. With Epstein gone and Apple Corps bleeding money, the Beatles were drowning in chaos. Ringo, tired of polished executives who accomplished nothing, found Klein refreshing, blunt, aggressive, promising to protect them. John embraced him first. George followed. Ringo, craving stability, signed on too, later saying Klein was a hustler and he felt it was time someone hustled for him. But Klein was a strategist who understood how to weaponize loyalty. He studied the fractures, Paul's need for control, John's restlessness, George's resentment, and Ringo's longing for peace, and he exploited them. Meetings turned into battlegrounds. Decisions became 3 versus 1. Paul refused to sign with Klein, and Klein encouraged the others to move forward without him. In 1970, Paul sued the other 3 Beatles and Klein. The lawsuit shattered what remained of their friendship. Distrust deepened into resentment and regret. The brotherhood wasn't destroyed only by egos, but by contracts and courtrooms. The cruel twist came by 1973, when Ringo realized Klein had mismanaged funds and manipulated contracts. Klein was fired. Investigations followed. The 3 who had supported him, including Ringo, admitted they'd been wrong. George once said the Beatles could only reunite if Klein wasn't there, and that he and Ringo were ready. That confession says everything. For Ringo, Klein's betrayal cut deepest. The man he trusted to protect them became the man who ensured they would never stand together again. After the dust settled, Ringo faced a brutal question. Was he really the least talented Beatle? For years he'd heard the jokes, the lucky drummer carried by Lennon and McCartney. After the breakup, those words echoed louder. There was no band left to hide behind. But time revealed what critics never saw. In the same sessions where Paul corrected him and John dismissed him, producers realized Ringo was the only Beatle who almost never drifted off tempo. George Martin, who once replaced him, later admitted Ringo wasn't just reliable. He was the human click track, the anchor holding the band together. Younger drummers studying his parts discovered they couldn't replicate his feel. As the years passed, the narrative flipped. His solo career produced real hits. Artists like Harrison, Clapton, Dylan, and Elton John called him back not out of nostalgia, but because his groove elevated their music. Even Paul, who once corrected him, inducted him into the Hall of Fame as a solo artist. Today, Ringo's legacy isn't luck or simplicity. It's precision, feel, and endurance. He wasn't the least talented Beatle. He was the heartbeat, the steady foundation that allowed the others to soar. The longer time passes, the clearer it becomes. Ringo wasn't the weakest link. He was the piece no one realized they needed, until he proved it for more than half a century. So now that you've seen the full picture, who do you think Ringo resented most? Paul, John, or Alan Klein? Whose role in this story shocked you the most, and why? If you want more brutally honest, behind-the-scenes stories about rock legends, don't forget to like the video and subscribe. There are still many secrets hiding behind those smiling faces.